The date is April 14th, 1865. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th U.S. President, is sitting in the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., watching a showing of Our American Cousin. Little did he know, John Wilkes Booth was right behind him. Born in a tiny log cabin in Hodgenville, Kentucky on February 12, 1809, Lincoln was raised an honest and humble boy. He lived the life of a farmer with no thought of what he would accomplish and no worry of his gruesome fate. As a young man, Lincoln was 6'4". At the beginning of his adult life, Lincoln studied law. He campaigned for a seat on the Illinois state legislature in 1831, at the same time the Black Hawk War broke out. He serves in the war, but doesn't have enough time to gain popular vote, and so in turn loses. Little did he know, this would be the beginning of his end.
Bang!
Abraham Lincoln met Mary Todd in Springfield, Illinois, where he was practicing as a lawyer. They were married in 1842 over her family's objections and had 4 sons. 3 of the 4 sons would never live to see adulthood.
When I married Abe, I never thought that they would all go out that way. Man, my kids, him, it's just all so sad.
In 1854, the controversial Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed in the House. This bill repealed the Missouri Compromise and introduced popular sovereignty across the states, which allowed people to vote on whether or not their state would allow slavery. Lincoln's anti-slavery platform made him extremely unpopular with Southerners and led to a series of heated debates in 1858 with Senator Stephen A. Douglas, the sponsor of the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act.
The Senate can be a scary place. You never know what can happen, even in government. Even though I agree with Preston Brooks, I need to keep myself armed with a cane to stop anything like that stop what happened from Charles Sumner happening to me. Anyways, what gives you the right to stop slavery, you stupid son of a...
Shortly after these debates, Lincoln gave one of his most famous speeches in the Senate, where he focused on slavery as a moral and political issue that threatened the continued existence of the United States.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or the other.
This speech was a key turning point in his career and got reactions from both the North and the South. The North loved him so much that he would later be nominated for the position of U.S. President. However, the South didn't. That speech was a key moment in his life that ticked off the wrong people, which would eventually be the death of him. And this would be detrimental.
Bang!
On November 6, 1860, Lincoln won the presidential election without the support of a single Southern state. Talk of secession, bandied about since the 1830s, took on a serious new tone. The Civil War was not entirely caused by Lincoln's election, but the election was one of the primary reasons the war broke out the following year, the beginning of an end. Lincoln gave the first inaugural address in 1861 to preserve the Union and avoid war. He sought to reassure the Southern states, who had seceded following his election.
I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery. in the states where it exists. The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. Thank you.
The speech did not go how Lincoln wanted, and so in the following months, on April 12, 1861, the Civil War officially began with the bombing of Fort Sumter. Over the next 4.5 years, nearly 5 million American men would serve as soldiers, with more than 600,000 of them falling as casualties. This would mark the Civil War as the bloodiest war in American history for both the North and the South. On July 22, 1862, over a year after the war started, Lincoln had changed his mind on the nation's most controversial argument, slavery. Soon after, he began writing the beginning drafts of the Emancipation Proclamation. This bill was an executive order he intended to put into action as soon as possible. It essentially declared that all the enslaved people in the Confederate States were now free men. However, he waited to give this, arguably his most famous speech, until after a more favorable battle, as the favor of the North was instrumental in keeping the Union together.
I hereby decree that all persons held as slaves within any states or designated part of the state, the people whereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforward and forever free.
The speech was a key turning point in the war and was extremely important in both boosting the North's perception of Lincoln as well as undermining the Confederacy. Soon after this crucial proclamation, enslaved people would be set free, allowing for black men to serve in the Union Army and help the Union turn the tides of the war, but also created enemies and deepened the divide between the North and the South, essentially setting the stage for his own death. Fast forward half a year to July 1st, 1863, and the war across America still rages on. This date will go down in history as one of the most important dates for the Civil War. That is the Battle of Gettysburg. In his invasion of the North, Confederate commander Robert E. Lee makes a risky decision to smash through Union forces and take Washington, D.C. from the west with 75,000 troops. General George E. Meade from the north meets him accidentally at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. After 2 days of battle, Lee makes his greatest mistake and sends out 15,000 men on a suicidal charge across the battlefield. By July 4th, both sides are exhausted. The following day, Lee's troops retreat across the Potomac, never to return to the North. The South suffers greatly, with nearly 30,000 killed, wounded, or missing. The North endures 23,000 casualties. For the remainder of the war, Lee will fight on the defensive. This is the decision day of the Civil War. The Union fails to pursue the retreating Confederacy, but the damage is done. Months later, as part of dedicating the National Cemetery to commemorate the fallen soldiers in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln gives yet another iconic speech that will go down in history and make an impact on all that hear.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we herely highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
For 2 more years, the war continues, with both the Confederate and Union armies seeing successes as well as failures on the battlefield. Finally, on January 31st, 1865, the 13th Amendment is passed in the Senate.
All in favor of passing the Emancipation Proclamation? Boo! Boo! You're passing this, the majority. No! Let's go!
With Lincoln's influence, the House of Representatives approves it, which calls for the emancipation of all slaves and no compensation to their owners. The amendment was passed by the Senate in 1864, but failed to receive the necessary votes in the House. By December of 1865, enough states ratified the amendment to make it constitutionally binding. Finally, at the beginning of 1865, the war finally ends with the Battle of Appomattox. On April 9, 1865, after Union forces capture much-needed Confederate supplies at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrenders to General Grant, marking the end of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln would go on to be elected for a second term. He would give more highlights from his speeches and have a much easier second time in office. He would also go on to give his second inaugural address to the nation.
Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh.
This would near the end of his time on earth giving speeches because,